You're listening to Now, a moral money signal for those ready to see. Not everyone will hear it, but the ones who do, they'll never sleep again. The architects of control. From law to empire, the founders of empire, they were not elected. They did not swear oaths to the public. They didn't campaign, and no one ever asked them to speak in front of a crowd. And yet, they shaped more of the modern world than most presidents, prime ministers, or kings. They were lawyers, at least on paper. But in truth, they were engineers of empire, quiet architects of influence, power, and control. This is the story of Sullivan Cromwell, a law firm that didn't just serve the elite, it manufactured them. In the late 1800s, while most of the world was still crawling through the rubble of the industrial age, two names, Algernon Sidney Sullivan and William Nelson Cromwell, were laying the foundation of a new kind of empire. Not one made with armies and flags, but with contracts, financial instruments, and quiet deals in quiet rooms. William Nelson Cromwell wasn't merely a legal mind. He was a tactician of systemic transformation. He pioneered the use of holding companies to sidestep the Sherman Antitrust Act, essentially legalizing monopolistic dominance under a different name. While the American people were being sold the myth of free markets, Cromwell was engineering a system where control could be consolidated invisibly, with no public accountability. He wasn't hired to interpret laws. He was hired to warp them in service of the highest bidder. And his most infamous act was orchestrating the acquisition of the Panama Canal Zone. This wasn't negotiation. It was manipulation of international politics to dismember sovereign territory, backed by corporate and military leverage. Cromwell aligned financial interests with government force to set the precedent. If business demands it, democracy will bend. The firm's early involvement in infrastructure, railroads, and transnational banking meant they were effectively laying the economic framework of the American empire, not with votes, but with contracts. Not with armies, but with influence. And this is the key lesson. Law is never neutral. Law in the wrong hands becomes a tool for theft on a planetary scale, legitimized through language and paper, enforced through power, and sustained through silence. That silence is what allowed Sullivan Cromwell to become the shadow government of capitalism. The world built by Sullivan Cromwell still exists, and it still runs on quiet backroom deals and legalized exploitation. That's why we need to create alternative structures. We need to stop borrowing from the system and start investing in Buildcoin economies, grounded in transparency, built from the bottom up, and immune to outside manipulation. Global justice won't come from new treaties. It comes from new tools. The Dulles Doctrine. When lawyers become spies. No part of Sullivan Cromwell's legacy reveals its true nature more than the Dulles brothers, John Foster and Allen. These weren't just powerful men. They were the manifestation of the firm's ideology. John Foster, a senior partner, became U.S. Secretary of State. Allen, also a partner, became the director of the CIA. Long before they held office, they were refining methods of control at Sullivan Cromwell. Methods they would later weaponize on a global scale. Their specialty was blending legal legitimacy with covert violence. The Dulles brothers were the bridge between boardroom and battlefield. Under their influence, the firm worked not only to protect American corporate interests abroad, but to actively destabilize any government that challenged them. The 1954 CIA-backed coup in Guatemala is the textbook example. Sullivan Cromwell represented United Fruit Company. Arbenz, the democratically elected president, threatened to redistribute unused land. That was enough. The brothers spun it as communism. Allen ran the operation. Foster cleaned it up on the diplomatic front. United Fruit got their land. Guatemala got decades of death squads. This was not an isolated event. It was a business model. In Iran, in Congo, in Chile, anywhere a nation tried to assert economic sovereignty, the formula was repeated. The Dulles playbook became U.S. foreign policy. and it was drafted in the offices of Sullivan Cromwell. This is why we can't rely on law firms, intelligence agencies, or governments to protect us. The lines between them are blurred. When the people writing the rules are the same ones toppling governments, we are not living in a democracy. We are living in a simulation of consent. Buildcoin is not just a community model, it's a shield. Buildcoin is not just a currency, it's a mechanism of sovereignty. We decentralize not for novelty, but for survival. Silence and complicity. The Nazi connection. But nothing exposes the rot quite like their work with IG Farben, the Nazi chemical conglomerate responsible for Zyklon B and the industrialization of mass murder. Sullivan Cromwell represented Farben's American assets and helped protect them as war clouds gathered. After the war, they helped Germany's industrial base recover, rebuilding the same corporations that armed the Reich. It wasn't about ideology. It was about maintaining the flows of capital. This is the world they built, one where genocide is just bad for business, and recovery is another consulting opportunity. The most horrifying part? They were never held accountable. No hearings, no consequences. They slipped back into suits and offices, continuing to shape the world with the same hands that had fed fascism. And still today, the firm exists. Powerful, respected, silent. If we want to build a world where law has meaning, where contracts reflect justice and not coercion, then we need to opt out of systems designed to protect predators. Buildcoin communities don't negotiate with this rot. They replace it. Buildcoin doesn't fund destruction. It underwrites resilience. Silence is complicity. Action is currency. And this isn't history. This is infrastructure. It's the architecture of control. And if we don't dismantle it ourselves, we'll be trapped in it forever. But now we have the tools. Now we build. Now we choose another future.